India, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, is making a huge bet on a pretty controversial climate technology. It's a gamble that could really chart a new path for heavy industry, or it could turn into a very, very expensive dead end. So let's break down exactly what's going on.
So what's all the fuss about? Well, back on May 11th, India's Department of Science and Technology announced something pretty big, a brand new, fully funded national testbed for carbon capture technologies. And look, we're not just talking about a policy paper here. This is a real-world facility, and it's being built to answer one massive question.
And that question is a real game changer. What if, instead of just trying to slow down emissions, we could literally suck the CO2 right out of the smokestacks of our most polluting industries, like cement and steel, and just stop it from ever getting into the atmosphere in the first place? That's the core idea here.
All right, so let's dive into India's big carbon capture push. We're talking about this new national testbed for climate technology. It's called the CCU Cement Cluster, and its whole purpose is to create a real-world playground to see if this tech can actually work at scale.
Now, what's really interesting is how they're building this thing. It's a public-private partnership. Think of it like a three-legged stool. You've got government money coming from the Department of Science and Technology, you have the actual industries who are going to deploy the tech, and then you have the brains from academic institutions doing the research. The end game? To create these plug-and-play systems that can be dropped right into existing industrial plants.
Okay, so we've been throwing this term around, but to really get what's happening, we need to be super clear on the lingo. The full acronym is CCUS. So let's quickly explain what that actually means.
CCUS stands for Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Storage. It's basically a whole suite of technologies that does exactly what it says on the tin. First, you capture the CO2 right at the source. But then, and this is the key part, you come to a fork in the road. You have a choice. You can either use it, that's the U for utilization, or you can store it, that's the S for storage.
And that choice we just mentioned? It's absolutely critical. It really boils down to this simple question for every single molecule of CO2 we capture. Do we recycle it into something new, or do we just bury it for good? So let's spell it out. The utilization path, which you'll often hear called CCU, is all about creating economic value, reusing the CO2. But the storage path, or CCS, is purely about mitigating climate change. It's about locking that CO2 away so it can't warm the planet. And as you can probably guess, these two very different goals lead to completely different outcomes.
And here you can see the contrast side by side. With CCU, the goal is to make money, turning CO2 into things like synthetic fuels, urea, or building materials. The climate benefit is kind of like a partial offset. And a big plus is that you don't need any special geology to do it. But with CCS, the goal is purely environmental. The output isn't a product you can sell, it's just CO2 pumped deep underground. This offers permanent removal, but, and this is a huge but, you need very specific geological formations to do it, like old, depleted oil fields.
Okay, so we get the tech. But why is India making this billion-dollar bet right now? To answer that, we have to zoom out and look at the country's huge long-term climate strategy.
This is the number that's driving everything: 2070. That's the year India has promised to reach net zero emissions. For a rapidly growing economy, that is a monumental task, and it means they need every single tool in the toolbox.
And that's exactly where CCUS comes in. For India, this is seen as absolutely essential for hitting that 2070 target. It's a way to develop their own homegrown technology, for sure, but more importantly, it's a potential lifeline for those hard-to-abate sectors. We're talking about industries like cement and steel. You can't just electrify them. Their basic chemical processes create CO2. CCUS is one of the only ways anyone has figured out for these core industries to decarbonize.
But let's be real, this is far from a simple fix. The technology faces massive hurdles, both economically and technically. So let's take an honest look at the road ahead, the challenges and the plan to overcome them.
And the challenges are different for each path. For CCU, the recycle option, the big questions are about scale and energy. It takes a ton of energy to convert CO2, and then you have to create a whole market for the new products. For CCS, the bury option, the worries are about safety, permanence, and just eye-watering costs. You have to make sure the CO2 never leaks, monitor it for centuries, and somehow come up with huge amounts of cash up front.
So how do you then begin to tackle problems that big? Well, you create a strategy, and that's exactly what India's done. Alongside this new testbed, they've released their first ever national R&D roadmap, basically a strategic playbook to guide this entire effort.
And the official objective, straight from the source, is, and I quote, to guide India's national efforts in advancing carbon capture, utilization, and storage. In other words, the plan is to turn all these scattered ideas into one coordinated national push to make this technology a reality for India.
So this all brings us back to the ultimate question. As India forges ahead, you can be sure the entire world will be watching. Is this technology a critical tool we absolutely need for a cleaner future? Or is it just a costly, complex distraction? India's ambitious experiment might not just decide its own path, it could end up providing the answer for all of us.